Well, welcome back. I hope you are well. As always, I am pleased to have you join me. Um, the past 10 days, or in the prior 10 sessions, we explored a number of um, options, conversations, discussions um, around the topic of whether you were prepared for relationships. At the end of the 10 series session, I stated that I would begin with a new theme. And the theme is designed, rather than ask you questions about your past and what you were trained or taught about relationships, the idea going forward was to provide some solutions. I understand, however, that we fall into different age groups. Generally speaking, I categorize everyone, male and female, into 3 groups: 0 to 18, or rather I should say 0 to 17, 18 to 35, and then 35 and above. Usually I have spoken, and my target audience has been the second group, 18 to 35, for a number of specific and disciplined reasons. The first group, I believe you are still under and should be under the direction, the supervision, the guidance, the training, the support, the nurturing of your parents, your loved ones, assuming that both are still around. The second group, you have just come into what I call your adult journey, in which case listening to a stranger or listening to someone you do not know could be a way of expanding the knowledge you do not have. I endeavor to stay away from the first group because I have a lot of respect for parents and what they believe is the right philosophy, the right attitude, the right approach for their loved ones and their children. So my default position would always be to refer you back to your parents if you fall within the first group. Now, the third group, 35 and above, I think you are a mature adult. The ideas I share may be of value to you, but in many ways, this is time for you to take ownership and make your decisions yourself. Obviously, looking out and trying to learn through other people's examples. Now, the 3 groups, however, it would be unfair for me to focus on just the middle group. So, in thinking about how best to present some, I'd say, words of a life poorly lived and a life well lived, with all of its palettes and colors and ups and downs, I thought perhaps I should make an exception. I will begin with the first group, but I will limit the age to 12. Most people start to move into puberty from about 12 years. Lately, a lot of young girls are starting that at 12 and sometimes 11. In any case, I think it would be wrong of me to start earlier. So I will speak to women in today's session who are between 12 and over. But the focal point is between 12 and 17. When you're just starting the journey of your femininity and coming to understand yourself. I would hope the advice can be applied to the other groups, but in today's session, I will be speaking to young girls between 12 and 17. The session that follows, I will speak to young boys between 12 and 17. And then once the 2 halves are sorted, I can move to the second group. Let me start with what I call the power of influence. Influence is such an, in my opinion, underrated part of society. Leadership is all about influence. Influence is the ability to make a person or a group of people behave in a manner either to their best interest or sometimes to their detriment. But the key part of it is the ability to change or influence behavior. I start with that for a number of reasons, partly because let me give you perhaps, well, before I say that, let me give you my experience of influence. I had a very, very great father, you know, a man I love very much, a man I will always love, a man I admired from a young age, and I idolized. I saw him work very hard as an engineer, and as a young child, between the age of 12 and 17, all I wanted to do was be like my father. So I chose the path of engineering, just like my father. I studied the same discipline area, specialized in the same area, just like my father. I had a good role model, and his influence over me, in a subtle way, chose the path and the life I lead today. In society, generally speaking, especially for younger people, most young people are very impressionable and therefore can be influenced. Now, let me give you some societal statistics. Perhaps this might be of value to you. Amongst boys, and this is primarily boys, between the age of 12 upwards, did you know that about 10 billion hours is spent every single day on video games? 10 billion hours. Now, if you include those who are below 12, the number goes even further. The reason all that time is spent on games is because the advertising industry, the manufacturers, are trying to influence young children based on a product that they have. So what we've seen of late is a lot of young boys spending too much time on video games. Now, I think some amount of video games are great. It develops some part of your brain, your response system, your ability to solve problems, your ability to think. But like anything, too much of a good thing could be quite poor or bad. But we can look beyond just the gaming industry, and we can look at the advertising industry. Now, here is some interesting statistics. In the UK, on the average, about 60 to 65% of the entire population of the UK are either overweight or obese. If you break it down based by ethnicity, without making a value judgment, what we find is 68 to 80% to 70% and over of all black people in the UK are overweight or obese. Amongst the white population, that number is 65 and above. When you bring in the mixed race population, that's about 60 and above. There is only one ethnicity that is below 50, and that is primarily the Asians, particularly the Orientals. In any case, when you look at the entire distribution, what you find is, as a society, we have become less healthy, so much so that our default position, in other words, the majority of people, are overweight and obese. The question is why? Well, the advertisers have been marketing and advertising to us, and therefore influencing us, sometimes in a subliminal manner, so much so that we have depended more on processed food and junk food rather than healthy forms of nourishment or exercise. I started with that process to illustrate the power of influence, that each and every one of us is being controlled, manipulated, influenced in a subtle way or in an overt way. Now, this brings me to the second part of the question I have, which is, what is the force for good or evil around you or in your life? What is the force for good, for evil around you or in your life? There are several. But let's begin with what most people start off with, which is family. Family plays a role. The second is your peer group. They play a role. Your religion, if there is one, plays a part. Social media, your digital world, plays a part. Now, of the four that I have just outlined, the ones that have had and currently have the least influence on you as a force for good is religion and the family. Because if you are 12 years and above, you are starting to come into the age of reason, the age where you want to distinguish yourself from your family. You want to build and bond with people who have similar interests as you do, and therefore you find yourself leaning towards your peer group much more than you do your family. 12 onwards is where dad starts to seem like a boring person because he doesn't understand all the social trends. In addition to that, there's a reliance on social media. I remember very clearly when I was in my teenage years, we used to have something that we call the 6 degrees of separation. Let me illustrate. If you wanted to send a package to me in London, and let's assume you were in Burkina Faso, there was a theory that between you and I, despite neither of us knowing each other, if you had my name and you had the package, that there would be about 6 people separating you from me. The way this worked was, all you had to know is where I was. London, England. You did not have to know my exact location in London, England. All you needed was a location and my name. Your first step will be to identify anyone traveling to the United Kingdom, and you would simply give them a package for me. And you would give them a name and a location. The person gets on the plane, flies to the United Kingdom, irrespective of where they landed. Let's assume Manchester Airport. Upon arrival, the idea would be that they would give the parcel or the package to someone they knew with the intention of seeing how many steps it takes for that package to get to me, on average, after so many years before this huge industrialization and the introduction of logistics and all of that. It turned out that the 6 was the magic number. Today, it's 1 as a result of social media. So, anybody in the world can reach out to me. If you go to my YouTube page, there's an email address that you can email me, info@mensaote.com, and I can receive your email direct. The people you follow on social media, Instagram, and all the other applications, you can directly message each and every one of them directly, just by following them. So we live in a more connected universe. Social media and your peer group, therefore, have become the most important influence in your life. Now, I know very much what may be going through your head. You might be thinking, what does this have to do with relationships? And what does this have to do with the topic of preparation for relationships and dating? It has everything to do with that. Therefore, let me begin with what I call the strategy. As a young woman, between 12 and 17 are over. The first thing I can teach you about relationships is a philosophy from the book The Art of War. Other books have actually identified the same or similar philosophies. The first is to understand and to know your enemy. That's the first battle strategy for war. You have to understand your enemy, because if you do, then you can prepare to ensure success. I am not suggesting that dating relationships should be a battle, but I'm saying that on the opposite side of any relationship is a human being. So there is an important requirement for you to understand the opposite side, the side that you will find attractive and that you would want to be with. And understanding doesn't mean the person, I'm saying the archetype or the frame or the general interests and needs. So for women, here is something to keep in mind. You can have a strategy that is short-term or long-term. Very important. There is something in between, a medium-term strategy. The life cycle of young people actually transition, just like myself. We begin from adolescence and we move into teenage age and we move into adulthood. And then for some of us, we might decide we want to be with a significant other, a beloved. So we move through a trajectory, but we all start from what we call dating. We progress from dating to relationships, and we progress, if we choose to something long-term, such as marriage, a union between two people. The younger you are, especially between 12 and 17, the more marriage, long-term relationships seem foreign to you. And therefore, the strategy that you might think that you need is a short-term strategy. Now, this is where I introduce a man's psyche into the picture. Men think in ways that are not too dissimilar to women, but instead we think in ways that identify that we have a preference that is slightly asymmetric sometimes, or contrary, or different to women. Our needs are different. So if you are 12 or 13 and you want to date and you just start in the process, it's more likely that you will find a boy within the same age range. That comes natural, and that is perfectly acceptable. He might be a year or two older than you, but understand something, he is still a boy. Therefore, if we go back to what I started the conversation with, I said that a lot of young boys these days are spending about 10 billion hours every day on online gaming. In addition to that, there is a huge amount of time being spent by young men on porn. Now, ladies, I hope this helps. We're giving out the game in these series. It means that the minds of most young men have been conditioned in two ways. Now, go back if you can and ask your parents or any elder statesperson around you what it was like to be, let's say, in the late early 70s, late early 80s, and the type of games that we had. Now what you find is we had games like Tetris, Super Mario. These were the ones that actually broke out. That it wasn't until the 90s that we started to see things like Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter and the adaptation of all the other games. Today is violence amongst gamers, where you can build and you can travel as a soldier, you can play different games, but in many ways it's about getting from one place to another, and you have weapons. So in the minds of a lot of young men, it's a programming of battle, about the winner takes all the spoils, and that all is fair in love and war. If you connect that to the fact that most of these young boys, therefore, spending so many hours with their games and not socializing themselves with the opposite sex, with what I call the dance, the subtle gesture and dance of developing an understanding of the opposite sex with regards to relationships and understanding the boundaries. More pleasure is therefore being found on online porn. It's accessible, mostly free, and you have a plethora of choices. Women that meet your fantasy in beauty, youth, attractiveness, and sometimes naughtiness. That is a cocktail. Violence and the objectification of women. So if you are a young girl, when I was young women were considered to be precious, something to be, I would say, courted, desired, but not objectified. Today's world, we've deregulated the sexual marketplace. It's been decentralized. It's been a race to the bottom. Sex has become a swipe, mostly free. Most people can get sex before breakfast in the morning, and we don't pay a price. So young men are starting to look at young women, and women generally, as objects, sexual objects. No emotions, because they have that battle mentality. Now, part of the reason for addressing this is to say to young girls, that means that you are the prey. A man sees you, a young boy sees you as a target, something he has to conquer. And once he gets through, he moves to the next. Between your legs is the target for most young men. Partly because they've seen everything online, so everything is objectified. But you as a woman, and as a young woman, you've been gifted something fascinating, which is what we call the gatekeeper's responsibility. You are a gatekeeper to your body, to your emotions, to your womb. You get to decide who you share any intimate moments with, and you get to decide when that begins. Not the men. You get to decide. So the power is in your hands, and with great power comes great responsibility. What this means is that if you can accept that irrespective of how you feel on the inside, the butterflies, the excitement of meeting a boy you fancy who is really good looking and very charming, you have to move very carefully, because a lot of these young boys have been raised without fathers, have been raised without structure, have been influenced by social media and people with power and the ability to influence, like gamers and game stations and advertisers. And so you're not precious in their eyes. I'm going to give you perhaps a useful litmus test. Go up to your father or your mother. In this case, if you are a woman, go up to your father and ask him a question. Who is the girl who he fell in love with at age 13? And ask him another question. Where is she today? I can tell you, on a balance of probabilities, probably 80 to 90% of men will tell you, I don't know. That goes a long way to show that despite your father being in love at a young age of 13, And despite all young boys saying, I'm in love, and saying all the right words, fast forward a few years, and you are completely history. You were simply a footnote in their journey. So you have to be very selective about who you give the keys to the vault to. Very important. Now, let me talk about the men's sexual strategy. This applies to all men once they have been exposed, or once they've bitten from the knowledge of good and evil, once they've eaten the fruit. The great sufferer, Job, said, "Behold, I give you this day a blessing and a curse." Once a young boy's mind has been exposed to sexuality and porn, and any form of very casual sexual behavior, it becomes very difficult because that appetite is there. And what we try to do with young boys and girls is train them not to discipline themselves in the process of exercising that appetite. But once it's been exercised, men have one simple strategy. I hate to say this. At the core of that strategy is an outcome. That outcome is the exploitation of women. The more vulnerable you are, the more you are exploited. It doesn't begin with exploitation. The desire is self-interest. He just wants to feel good. And he needs you to make him feel good. In other words, he needs your body to make him feel good. However, that sexual strategy is not conducive to a woman's value. A man's sexual strategy, especially once he has tasted of the fruit and has lost his virginity, is introduced to a whole new world. The younger he is, the less he has to offer, the less price he pays for his mistakes. The younger he is, the more you should be careful as a woman. Because the mistake you make will be yours to bear, mostly without his support. The man's strategy is a simple one. We want quantity and quality, but we want to give the least amount of resources. So most young boys and most men want to bed the most attractive women that they can find in exchange for the least amount of resources and responsibility. It's a biological need to spread our seeds. The younger he is, the less astute about the importance of protecting his seed, which means, and this leads me to the reason why it is important. This is all important because women, especially young girls, women pay a higher price for their mistakes within the sexual marketplace than men do. In other words, the burden on women from a mistake requires the investment of time, her resources, and unfortunately, her value. So for example, if you're 13 and 14 and start having sex, and for some reason, unprotected sex, and you get pregnant, there goes your life. You become a mother as a teenage mother. And the data, the statistics are there. I'm not going to bore you with all of that. Reason being, young people really don't care about what old men think. I'm no different. I'm in that category. But I will say this. A woman pays forward in a form of an annuity for the errors of her ways, the younger she is. Yes, we have the pill, and yes, we have other technologies. My advice to you is learn to say no. And if you have already tasted of that fruit, you have to be very selective and be very careful. I have one rule and one rule only. Do not get pregnant. I cannot say do not have sex. I would love to. I would hope that should be the message. However, in the modern West, we have young people being influenced so much, especially by the boys, to participate in activities that the boys have seen online, which is just to gratify their desires. And young girls are forced, sometimes coerced, sometimes drugged, drunk, beyond consent, to behave in manners that they regret. So my recommendation to you, and I'm speaking to you as a father, perhaps if you are within that age range, I'm speaking to you as a father. But if you're above that age range, I'm speaking to you as a brother, a friend, a mentor, perhaps someone who is a voice of reason, the voice in the wilderness. And I'm simply saying, understand the sexual strategy of men. But most importantly, you have to understand your sexual strategy. The female sexual strategy should be as follows: to protect what she has, her value, beauty, youth, fertility, chastity, decorum, for as long as possible, and only to bestow that gift to the highest caliber man that she can find, who is willing to pay the ultimate price, which, in my opinion, comes much later, beyond age 12 to 17. That is the challenge. Now, in doing that, you have to understand with men, we are cost-benefit calculators. Growing up, I was told, don't accept free gifts from strangers, because nothing is free. There is no such thing as a free lunch. If one wants to manipulate you, they start by giving you gifts. And at some point, you become indebted to them. And sometimes, as I say, the wages of sin is death. The expectation of how you should pay them back is often in a different currency. Sometimes it's, I just want to see you smile. And then it begins with a touch. And then you might be, I guess, having invested so much, be coerced into doing things that you would not normally do. Your reproduction strategy should drive and should create a selectivity process that is unbreakable, so that 99% of the time you should say no. And the one time you say yes, and this leads me to perhaps what I would call a tactical approach. The one time you should say yes, you should be exchanging sex for romance, and rather than focus on sex, which is all men want, and how we are driven. And let me say this to young girls so you can understand. When a boy gets hungry, he has to eat. Speak to any of your friends who are between 12 and over, whether in school. When we get hungry, we have to eat. We don't care if we're having a Snickers, or if we're having a burger, or if we're having a steak. We are hungry and we have to eat. We might go to the extent of choosing what we want. There will be days when mom says, what would you like to eat? And we say, pasta, Italian food. Some other days we say, can we get a takeaway for Chinese? That desire to satisfy a need is similar to the desire for sex. A similar comparison will be urinating. The need that a man has to ejaculate can be so powerful that we would do anything, we would say anything, we would trade anything for that desire to be satisfied. Ejaculation, therefore, for men is synonymous with urinating. We don't really care where we go and urinate, because you have to understand women. I guess this is a key point to understand. Your body is designed and formed in such a way that you have to be penetrated sexually. A man's body is designed where he has to be the one penetrating. So there is no spiritual intimacy with men with regards to sex. Our genitals are sometimes disconnected from our heart, whereas a woman's genitals are connected to her emotions and feelings and connected to her heart. which is partly why a boy can say I love you at 13, sleep with you, go next door, sleep with his friend's sister, travel to the next town or street and sleep with another woman, and still not be satiable. Partly, there is no orifice in a man's body that is designed to be penetrated. The only orifice is actually an exit in a man's body. We are the ones who penetrate, and therefore, like taking a piss, it has to be done, which is why porn has played a part, I guess, in influencing a lot of boys, because we can see the picture, we can see the video, and we can get that need met ourselves. When I talk to men, I would address the whole thing about masturbation, because that is a huge issue that has to be toned down. I wouldn't say stopped, but it really has to be toned down a lot. So for young women, you have to lead with romance. Lead with your chastity, your purity. If you are a virgin, lead with that virgin's prize. That way you don't have to have an excuse why you don't want to have sex. You see, once you've broken your hymen, sexually broken, there is no excuse, because you can't reject the boy you like on the grounds that you don't want to have sex. He might think you don't fancy him because he knows you've already broken the hymen. Sexually, you're no longer a virgin. And his position would be, why don't you just take the pill? And you'll be forced into using technology because you cannot reject the person who desires you. On the other hand, if you are still a virgin, you have a powerful alibi. You can simply say, I'm not ready to lose my virginity. And generally speaking, you have something strong on your side to fight against the forces of pressure and influence. In any case, you have to lead with romance rather than sex. If you lead with sex, your attractiveness and beauty, men will objectify you. Men do not objectify women until women objectify themselves first. Powerful statement. We do not see you as an object until you start to display yourself as an object. Makeup, where you carry yourself, sexualization of how you dress, how you speak, how you sit, behaving less like a lady. If you objectify yourself, recognizing that we are all objects, we are called animated objects, but we are not expected to objectify ourselves sexually. If you do so, men will objectify you. So as a young woman, you lead with chastity, decorum, your traditional values, and I'll give you perhaps one of the most important things and tools to help you get through the difficult times. If you were playing the game Scrabble, you wouldn't score that much with this word. It's a 2-letter word. N-O. No. You have to get comfortable with saying no. Your focus should be so strong that you do not break that focus by saying yes. Now, Warren Buffett, an investor, and a lot of investors, and a lot of inventors, and a lot of business people will tell you the secret to their success was saying no to all the ideas that came or that were presented to them. Warren Buffett says, I say no more than 99% of the time to all opportunities. Now, this then provides him with a powerful opportunity to choose the best of the best of the best. As a young woman, between 12 and 17, you have to learn how to say no. There should be boundaries. Set those boundaries and do not deviate from those boundaries. Men will take whatever you give them and some. The same men will break their promises, always. I have. At the time, I didn't know I would break my promise. I could have sworn on my life that I would never break my promise, but I did. You see, we make vows to God and we make promises to people. Promises can be broken. Vows cannot be broken. or should not be broken. Or, for those who choose to break their vows, they are reminded of the consequences of breaking the vow. Do not rely on a man's words, the younger you are. We will say anything to get between your cheeks. So I would encourage you, if you're a young woman, stay focused, choose romance, date, interact with boys. I tend to find that the more boys you have in your family as a girl, the more you learn how to interact with boys. You've heard me say before that foreplay should not be the first play you have with a man. And for a lot of young girls who do not and are not exposed to the behaviors, the mannerisms, the attitudes of boys, the first time they interact with men and it becomes sexualized or romantic, they cannot stop. Whereas if you've been around boys, you understand our temperaments, you can play the game we play, you can afford to say no, but you can afford to say no at the right time in order not to offend or chase away someone who you might care about. You understand how to say no, when to say no, and the words to use. So I would encourage you, if you have brothers, stop playing with your brothers. Stop playing with your father. If you do not have brothers, look for boys around your community who you trust, cousins, neighbors, even older men. Because older men will not abuse that privilege. It would be illegal for them to have sexual relations with you. So you can, in the absence of those who you can play with in your peer group, you can look for men. And when I say older men, I'm referring to men who are, say, 18, 19, people who are above the age of consent, adults. That way there is a societal repercussion on their part if they do anything wrong to you or with you. But you have to learn how to, what I do call the dance of the sexes. Understand what makes both parties interesting, but date. And I remember growing up, I used to date and we would have guests in our house. And let me segue, advice to mothers and fathers. From about 11, 12, you have to open up the home so that your daughters can have boys around under your supervision. They're fine to be in a part of the house that you can see them, and you can in stages, allow more privacy into their interaction. You start with, you have to be in the living room, and you set the boundaries. You don't touch her inappropriately. You don't kiss. You can set the terms the younger she is. You can hold hands. You're allowing that play to begin so that she can learn how to say no. She can learn when a man is being too sexually forward with her, but she can do so in a place where she knows mom is around. All I have to do is call my mother's name or my father's name. As she starts to get older, you can allow them more privacy. You can move to another room, but leave the doors open. You can allow them when she gets to about 17, you can go up to your room, leave the door open. There are rules. You're teaching the young man how to court a woman. You're teaching the young woman how to behave like a lady. We have to get back to the basics. A woman, the younger you are, the more you should demand a gentleman in behavior. You want the right decorum. You want him to apply chastity in his behaviors, in his mannerism, in his words, in his language. You want to inform and expect romantic pursuit. He should bring flowers, sometimes flowers from mum, just for the opportunity to be around you. You have to retrain and teach boys. My mentor once said, you cannot change whatever you're willing to tolerate. And whatever you tolerate, you should not complain about. So if you accept almost nothing, a smile, he comes to your house just with a smile. Now he doesn't have to buy flowers, he can pick flowers from his mother's garden, but there should be an expectation that he should be a gentleman. And in the process, always say no. Now let me close with something I think is important. I started this session talking about boys and the addiction we have as boys to gaming and porn. What we have found is, on the women's side, is the over-sexualization using social media, Instagram, Twitter, OnlyFans, and all the other applications to overtly communicate yourself as an object. Minimize that. I would say between your age and 18, you should not be on Instagram, you should not be on OnlyFans, on Facebook, or any social media sites, because those sites are simply advertising platforms for men to sexualize you and objectify you. Avoid the temptation that comes with instant gratification, that instant requirement to like, or for someone to compliment you, or for someone to acknowledge you. The more the tendency that you find in yourself where you need stimulation or confirmation, the more you need help, because it will end very badly. Now, I hope this has been useful. I think this is more than enough for one session. And in the next session, I will talk to boys, same age range. And I think ladies can benefit from the conversations that I will have with men in the same way I think men should benefit from the conversation I had today with the young girls. Now, until next time,